London breathed in steel and silence that morning, as if the city itself held its breath for what was about to begin. Ethan Cross watched the skyline from the back seat of a black car, his reflection cutting through the glass like a ghost. He wasn't here for love, he was here for conquest. Isabella Vale was a name whispered in every boardroom, a woman with both power and purity, the kind of contrast that fascinated men who had forgotten how to feel. Ethan had studied her life like a blueprint, her habits, her speech, even the way she smiled in interviews. To him, she was the final test, the mark that could secure his legacy or unravel it completely. As he stepped out onto the cobblestone driveway of her art foundation, the winter air pressed against his chest, and for the briefest moment, he hesitated. Not because of guilt, but because something unseen had already begun to stir within him. The interior of the foundation smelled faintly of oil paint and polished oak. Ethan's eyes traced the walls lined with canvases, expressions of hope, loss, and rebirth, all the emotions he had long forgotten how to feel. He caught sight of Isabella for the first time, standing by a stained glass window as sunlight fractured around her. She turned with quiet curiosity, her movements unhurried, her gaze steady. She extended her hand, and he played his part, his smile effortlessly convincing. Yet, as their palms met, a tremor of something real passed between them. Subtle, fleeting, but undeniable. It was the first crack in his well-built facade. The meeting unfolded like a dance of intellect and pretense. Isabella spoke of art as memory, of brushstrokes as confessions. Ethan listened with polite fascination, calculating how each word could lead him closer to her trust. Yet beneath his strategic silence, her voice stirred something forgotten, the simplicity of truth. He caught himself watching the way she gestured, the way her laughter filled the space like a melody untainted by ambition. When she excused herself briefly, Ethan exhaled, realizing his heart had shifted tempo. For the first time, deceit felt heavy, like a suit that no longer fit. After the meeting, Isabella led Ethan through the gallery's private wing, a quieter space filled with works from emerging artists. She spoke not to impress, but to share. There was an unguarded sincerity in her words, the kind that disarms even the most guarded listener. Ethan followed, his rehearsed charm faltering under the weight of her authenticity. Every piece of art seemed to mirror his duplicity. Fractured faces, hands reaching for light. As she turned to him, asking what he truly saw in art, he hesitated for the first time, realizing he didn't have an answer. When Ethan stepped back into the night, the city's lights felt colder than before. He should have been triumphant. The first meeting had gone exactly as planned, but instead of satisfaction, he carried an unfamiliar weight in his chest. He replayed her words in his mind, her laughter echoing against the walls of his silence. Somewhere deep within, the part of him that once knew tenderness stirred awake. As he looked up at the frost-kissed skyline, he understood that the game he had begun was no longer just about money. It was about her, and for the first time, he feared winning. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's presence inside Isabella's world deepened like ink soaking into parchment. He became a familiar face in her foundation, attending meetings, offering insights and playing the part of the benevolent investor. Each smile was still a strategy, but the conviction behind it began to blur. Isabella trusted easily, not from naivety, but from a faith in people he could no longer comprehend. He watched her speak to her staff, always with grace and certainty, unaware of the quiet war inside him. At night, Ethan filed his reports to Lucas, yet each message grew shorter, less convincing. The lines between pretense and feeling began to dissolve, and for the first time in years, Ethan feared the truth, not of being caught, but of what he was becoming. Ethan watched her lead a staff meeting about an upcoming charity gala. Her passion was disarming, not the kind that sought admiration, but the kind that believed in something pure. He had met countless powerful women, but none who wielded kindness like a weapon against cynicism. When she asked for his opinion on the event's logistics, he answered instinctively, speaking honestly instead of manipulatively. She noticed, smiling slightly, as if she sensed a flicker of truth behind the mask. That smile lingered longer than it should have, and for a moment, Ethan forgot the purpose of his presence. The betrayal still loomed ahead, but his heart was already rebelling against it. The gala planning brought them closer, forcing shared hours and late-night calls that blurred into familiarity. One evening, as they reviewed sponsorship details in her office, a storm rolled over the city. Lightning framed her silhouette against the window, and for a fleeting second, she looked almost unreal. She spoke about trust, about how art could heal a fractured world. Ethan wanted to tell her how broken he really was, how every word she said felt like light burning through his lies. Instead, he smiled, offering a half-truth that sounded too much like confession. She studied him quietly, her intuition grazing the edges of his disguise. Ethan's partner, Lucas Hale, grew impatient. In a dimly lit bar across town, he confronted Ethan about delays, his words edged with threat. "You're getting soft," Lucas hissed. Ethan laughed it off, but his voice cracked. He assured Lucas the plan was still intact, that Isabella's trust was almost complete. But deep down, the lie felt heavier than ever. As he left the bar, Ethan caught his reflection in the rain-streaked window, a man caught between two worlds. He no longer knew which was real: the con he created, or the woman who made him wish he wasn't part of it. The night before the gala, Isabella stayed late at the foundation, arranging details herself instead of delegating. Ethan appeared unannounced, offering to help. She looked up, surprised but not displeased. Together they moved quietly through the empty gallery, adjusting lights and seating cards. At one point, their hands brushed as they reached for the same photograph, a portrait of two dancers locked in perfect balance. Neither spoke, but something wordless passed between them, fragile and electric. For the first time, Ethan felt peace. Not triumph, not control, just the stillness that comes when a lie stops feeling necessary. The night of the gala shimmered with elegance and deceit. Guests arrived in waves of black suits and champagne laughter, oblivious to the storm brewing behind polished smiles. Ethan stood beside Isabella as the cameras flashed, her presence radiant, his perfectly rehearsed charm intact. Yet under the gilded ceiling, surrounded by art and luxury, he felt a growing ache in his chest. Every compliment she offered, every glance of gratitude, chipped away at the lie that had built their world. When she thanked him in her speech, calling him the man who believed in her vision, his hands trembled slightly. Lucas's message buzzed in his pocket. "Tonight, finish it." Ethan smiled for the cameras, but the truth was already clawing its way to the surface. Later, beneath the fading echoes of applause, Ethan found himself alone with Isabella on the gallery terrace. The city stretched beyond them, stars dissolving into skyscraper lights. She spoke softly, thanking him again for his dedication, unaware that his silence hid the truth that could shatter her. The wind carried her perfume, faint and familiar, grounding him in a moment that felt far too real for the life he lived. He wanted to confess, to let the truth bleed out before it became poison. But when she turned to face him, her smile so trusting it almost hurt to see, the words froze in his throat. Instead, he whispered something meaningless about the view, and she believed him. Days after the gala, Ethan's conscience began to unravel. He missed deadlines, ignored Lucas's calls, and avoided the documents that would finalize Isabella's ruin. Instead, he found himself drawn to her world. The art studios, the community centers, the quiet hours she spent painting when no one else was watching. One evening, he entered her workspace uninvited, watching her brush move across the canvas, transforming color into confession. When she noticed him, she smiled and said softly, "You don't have to pretend to understand art. Just feel it." He did. For the first time, he felt something that wasn't a strategy. It was surrender. Lucas arrived unannounced. His cold voice cut through Ethan's growing doubt like a blade. "She's ready to trust you completely," he said. "It's time." Ethan tried to stall, claiming the financial data wasn't ready. Lucas didn't buy it. He saw the hesitation in Ethan's eyes. Don't tell me you've started to care." Lucas sneered. Ethan didn't answer. As Lucas walked away, Ethan's reflection stared back from the glass door. A man torn between loyalty and love, between profit and redemption. The mask was cracking, and behind it, something human was beginning to breathe again. That night, Ethan returned to the foundation after everyone had gone. He stood in the dark, surrounded by Isabella's art. Every canvas, a silent witness to his betrayal. He found her latest piece on the easel, a portrait of two figures standing at opposite ends of a broken bridge, their hands almost touching. He realized it wasn't just art, it was prophecy. His phone vibrated again. Another message from Lucas. Ethan didn't open it. Instead, he turned off his phone, sat down in front of the painting, and whispered to no one. "I can't do it." The words echoed softly in the still air, marking the first moment of truth had spoken in years. The morning began in quiet perfection. Sunlight through white curtains, the smell of fresh coffee, the illusion of peace. Isabella sat at her desk, signing contracts for new donations, humming softly to herself. Across town, Ethan sat in his apartment, hands shaking over the keyboard. He had written his confession a dozen times, each one deleted before it could be sent. His phone buzzed. "Lucas, it's done." Ethan froze. Within seconds he understood. Lucas had acted without him. The trap had been sprung, and Isabella unknowingly was already falling. Panic ripped through him as he grabbed his coat and ran into the street. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cross wasn't chasing profit. He was chasing time. By the time Ethan reached the foundation, chaos had already begun. Isabella's assistant rushed past him, clutching folders, her voice trembling about missing funds. In the main hall, reporters gathered outside the glass doors like vultures sensing blood. Isabella stood frozen in the center of it all, disbelief spreading across her face as she read the documents. Numbers, signatures, his name. Her voice broke when she whispered, "Ethan?" He stepped forward, eyes wide, words stumbling over guilt, but it was too late. The evidence was perfect, the betrayal complete. Her expression shifted from shock to devastation, then to something worse. Recognition. Security was called. The staff avoided his gaze as they escorted Ethan out, their silence heavier than any accusation. Isabella didn't speak, didn't shout, didn't demand explanations. Her calmness was the cruelest punishment, the kind that comes from realizing someone you trusted has hollowed out the ground beneath your feet. She turned her back to him, staring at the broken reflection of the foundation's sign on the marble floor. As the doors closed behind him, Ethan looked back once. The woman who had taught him sincerity now stood surrounded by ruin, a ruin he had built with his own hands. The news broke within hours. Every network, every headline, every whisper in every corporate corridor. Ethan Cross accused of defrauding the Veil Foundation. Lucas had made sure the evidence pointed to him alone. Ethan watched it unfold from his apartment, the television casting a pale light over his hollow face. He had lost everything, his career, his name, and the only woman who had ever believed in him. But the worst part wasn't the exposure. It was the silence. Isabella didn't call. She didn't demand an apology. She simply vanished into the noise, leaving him to drown in the echo of what he'd done. Isabella walked through her gallery that night, long after everyone had left. The paintings glowed faintly under emergency lights, ghosts of beauty lingering in the dark. Her sister Mara found her standing in front of the portrait of the broken bridge. "You should hate him," Mara whispered. Isabella didn't answer. She just stared at the figures in the painting. Two souls reaching across emptiness, and for a moment, her expression softened. "He lied," she said finally, voice trembling. "But part of me still believes he meant at least one thing he said." The tears came quietly, not from love, but from mourning the man he could have been. Weeks bled into months. Ethan Cross disappeared from the glittering circles that once defined him. His penthouse was sold, his name whispered in disdain, his phone long silent. He wandered the edges of London, where ambition went to die, in dim pubs and forgotten streets. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face the moment she realized the truth. Regret became his only companion, guilt his only wealth. Somewhere deep within, the man who had once lived by lies began to rot. But inside that decay, a strange seed of honesty started to grow. He didn't want forgiveness. He wanted to deserve it, even if she never saw him again. Isabella rebuilt in silence. The foundation survived the scandal, thanks to her sister's resolve and her own unbreakable calm. But something inside her remained fractured, not from the financial loss, but from the intimacy of betrayal. She still painted, though her work had changed. Gone were the colors of warmth and light. In their place came stormy tones and figures that reached for things just out of grasp. At night, she would walk through her gallery and pause before one painting, a faceless man kneeling in shadow. She didn't know why she kept it, or why she sometimes whispered his name under her breath when no one was listening. Ethan found work where no one knew his name. Small accounting jobs, manual data entry in windowless rooms. He avoided mirrors, avoided people, avoided anything that reminded him of what had been. One night, while cleaning out his desk, he found a photo. Isabella at the gala, smiling under gold light. The sight of it crushed him, yet it also reminded him why he was still breathing. That night, he made a vow. If he could not erase the past, he would at least repair what was broken, even if it meant disappearing entirely. The first step toward redemption began with surrender. Mara saw him first. Late one evening, leaving a charity event, she spotted Ethan standing across the street. Not approaching, not hiding, simply watching from the rain. He looked thinner, quieter, like a man learning to live with the ruins he'd made. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. She considered crossing the street to confront him, to tell him to stay away forever. But something in his face, a stillness, a kind of sorrow that couldn't be faked, stopped her. He didn't speak. He just nodded once as if asking permission to keep breathing, and then turned away. When Mara told Isabella later, her sister said nothing. But that night, she didn't sleep. Ethan moved to the outskirts of the city, living modestly and anonymously. He donated what little he earned to the same charities Isabella supported, under a name she'd never recognize. Each act of kindness felt like a fragment of debt repaid, though he knew it would never balance the scales. One evening, while volunteering at a shelter, he saw a newspaper article pinned to the wall. The Veil Foundation expands internationally. Isabella's photos smiled back at him. He smiled too, faintly, not with envy or regret, but with peace. He finally understood that loving her didn't mean having her. It meant becoming worthy of the faith she once gave him. Redemption rarely arrives with fanfare. It slips quietly into the corners of broken lives. Months after disappearing, Ethan stumbled upon a rumor. Lucas Hale was circling Isabella's foundation again, using new investors, new lies. The realization struck like cold steel. The man who had once corrupted him now sought to finish what Ethan had tried to undo. For the first time, Ethan saw his purpose clearly. This wasn't about forgiveness or love. It was about protection. He began to gather everything: emails, contracts, proof of Lucas's manipulations, risking the little stability he had left. Every night he worked until dawn, driven not by guilt anymore, but by the simple, selfless need to keep her safe. Lucas didn't notice Ethan's shadow until it was too late. Late one evening in an upscale restaurant where Lucas met potential investors, Ethan appeared calm, composed, holding a folder. "You're done," he said quietly. Lucas laughed, dismissing him as a ghost from a ruined past. But when Ethan placed the evidence on the table, every falsified record, every account, the color drained from Lucas' face. "You think she'll believe you?" Lucas spat. Ethan smiled faintly. "She doesn't have to. The world will. as Ethan walked away. Lucas called after him, "You're still the same fool, Cross." But for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like one. The fallout was immediate. Lucas' empire began to crumble as regulators and the media unearthed his schemes. But in the chaos, Ethan's name resurfaced, once again painted as the villain turned whistleblower. The headlines didn't glorify him. They doubted him. Yet, behind closed doors, Isabella learned the truth. Her lawyer handed her the evidence Ethan had anonymously provided. She read every page in silence, tears welling as she recognized the handwriting in the margins, his small, meticulous notes. He had destroyed his last chance at redemption in the eyes of the world, all to give her back hers. Ethan never sought credit. He simply vanished again, leaving London behind for quieter streets along the coast. But Isabella couldn't let him fade into silence. One evening, she traveled to a seaside town where his trail ended. The air smelled of salt and rain as she found him near the docks, fixing boats for cash. He looked older, rougher, but peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. When he saw her, his breath caught, not from surprise, but from the ache of recognition. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "You didn't have to come." She looked at him for a long time before whispering, "I did." They spoke for hours about the past, the pain, the spaces between forgiveness and forgetting. Ethan didn't ask for absolution, and Isabella didn't offer it. Instead, they simply existed beside one another, no longer pretending to be savior or sinner, but two people learning how to breathe again. Before she left, she said softly, "You saved my life, even if you broke it first." Ethan smiled, tears filling his eyes. As her car disappeared into the fog, he turned toward the sea. For the first time, the wind didn't bite. It felt like release. He had lost everything that could be taken, but gained the one thing that could never be stolen: peace. Time softened the sharp edges of their story. Months passed, and the world moved on. The scandal became a faded headline, the kind people remembered only when reminded. Ethan remained by the coast, his life quiet, almost monastic. He fixed boats, helped strangers, and learned the small rituals of peace: morning walks, strong coffee, the sound of gulls. Yet every now and then, he'd glance toward the horizon, wondering if she ever thought of him. He didn't expect to see her again. Some stories didn't need epilogues. Until one day, life decided otherwise. The Veil Foundation had grown beyond what Isabella once dreamed. She traveled now, across cities, across oceans, building art schools for children who had nothing. But even in success, her heart carried a silent echo. Sometimes she'd catch herself looking for him in crowds, in reflections, in moments of quiet. One afternoon, while hosting a program on the coast, a volunteer handed her a list of local workers who helped rebuild the pier. Her eyes froze on one name: E. Cross. The pen slipped from her fingers. Fate, it seemed, had been patient. She found him that evening on the pier, repairing a fishing net with hands roughened by honest work. He didn't see her at first. She simply stood watching. The man who had once destroyed her, now rebuilding the world piece by piece. When he finally looked up, their eyes met, and time folded in on itself. No words came, only the weight of everything that had ever been said between them, and everything that hadn't. She smiled first, small and tremulous, and he returned it, unsure if it was permission or forgiveness, but maybe it didn't matter. Maybe this was enough. They walked along the shoreline in silence, speaking only when words felt necessary. She told him about her travels, about the children whose lives had changed because of the foundation. He listened, every word a balm he didn't deserve. When she asked about him, he simply said, "I build things now." She smiled, eyes soft with understanding. "You always did," she whispered. They reached the end of the pier as the sun dipped low, painting their shadows across the water. Two figures walking side by side, not as lovers reborn, but as souls finally at peace, with the wreckage that made them human. That night, long after she'd returned to her hotel, Isabella stood by the window watching the sea. Somewhere out there, Ethan would be walking home under the same moonlight. She closed her eyes and whispered his name, not as a plea, but as a benediction. On the shore below, Ethan looked up at the stars, feeling the faint warmth of something unspoken drift through the wind. They would not meet again. Not in this life, but both knew their story had found its peace. Love hadn't saved them, it had changed them. And in that quiet, irreversible transformation, they finally became whole.